I'm Cyril Gerald-Quinn. As we look back, I look back at the greatest show ever created in mankind, The Wire. The Wire Remix. We're gonna go through all 60 episodes over the course of the next few months. This first episode, of course, is the Target Season One, Episode One, 2002. This when this series began. First, as always, I'm streaming live on my YouTube channel. On my YouTube channel, you can catch this broadcast anytime at Stitcher, YouTube, Blog Talk Radio. Yeah, I did shave. So this is Cyril Joe Quinn. It's not a stand-in. It's been that quarantine shave. YouTube, Blog Talk Radio later on, Stitcher, Spotify, and a number of other, of course, iTunes, and of course a number of other platforms which you can catch this program on. The Wire premiered June 2nd, 2002. This was on HBO Sunday at 9. It was in that coveted Sunday at 9 o'clock spot. Now, this was not a highly anticipated, it was not a hyped up show. Matter of fact, now you would see posters around, around bus stops and metro stops and train stations. So they did that. They did that type of promotion to HBO, as HBO did with all its new shows in terms of that kind of promotion. But it was not a ballyhooed show that that everybody was saying, "Whoa, I can't wait for this! Can't wait to see this show." It was not that, not in the least bit. And it premiered again June 2nd, 2002. Now, this is in the mid. You got to understand. You go back to 2002. This is in the midst of two dynamic shows who are dominating on HBO: The Sopranos and also Sex in the City. Those were the two go-to shows on HBO by far. Those were the two shows that people. Those were two of the most popular shows on television. 2002, you look at TV Guide's top 10 television shows, did not include The Wire season one. You had shows like Boomtown, Gilmore Girls, were in TV Guide's top 10 shows. Think about what I just said: Boomtown and Gilmore Girls. Yeah. So again, not a lot of hype going into the first season of this show whatsoever. I didn't even see it. I didn't see it until late in the season. I think the episode where, well, listen, if you haven't seen it, then spoiler alert. The episode where Wallace was killed, Michael B. Jordan, of course, Wallace was killed. That's the episode that was the first time I saw the show in real time. Then I went back and watched it on demand following, I think later on, 2003 before season two premiered. So it was not a show that everybody, that a lot of people a lot of people were talking about. Season one, episode one, The Target was directed by Clark Johnson. Of course, Clark Johnson was a journeyman actor. Has directed some episodic television. Matter of fact, played was a one of the stars in season 5 of The Wire. It was as Gus Haynes, one of the editors in the newspaper. So he was the original first director of the entire series. Of course, the episode one was written by David Simon, the creator, and Ed Burns, who played a major role, of course, in season 4 with the classroom narrative in season 4. Couple things that The Wire had going for it that you hadn't seen from other shows. Number one, they had an epigraph. So before the show would do its music and show you all the cast of characters, they would have an epigraph that would basically be a theme for the episode. This episode one, the epigraph was "When it's not your turn." That was McNulty. That was, of course, McNulty talking to Bunk, played by Wendell Carter. So I hadn't seen that before. And I don't think that had been done in television, where you have an epigraph and then you have the where you have the scenes play. You have the opening scene. They would have the opening scene, and then they would have the music with the cast of characters, and then the epigraph. So those are three things that The Wire had that I hadn't seen on television. Most shows just go directly. Most shows just go directly into either a musical theme or just or what was becoming new and becoming popular at that time was you would see the show immediately go into the to the start of the show, and you would see the names without a musical theme. You would just see names, the names of the characters. I know my wife and my kids was popular, kind of started that a little bit, going to directly into the show and just showing the names of the characters. But The Wire was different with the epigraph, starting the epigraph. Now, this episode was a McNulty. This was a McNulty D'Angelo Barksdale episode all the way. These two characters were, I would say, combined, were in probably 80% of the scenes. They were in 80% of scenes. This was a Jimmy McNulty, D'Angelo Barksdale, D'Angelo Barksdale episode, without question. The opening scene comes out. The opening scene, of course, not only set the tone for the entire season one, but it set the tone for the entire series, where you have a dice game, a crap game going wrong. One of the characters who had no lines, named Snot Boogie, is laying down dead, shot. You have blood coming out his nose. He's dead in the middle of the street. You have McNulty along with a witness who is telling the story of Snot Boogie and the crap game. Of course, the famous line, the famous quote from the young man saying, "Why you had to let Snot Boogie play? Because it's America." The story went so Snot Boogie, every Friday night, Snot Boogie would play in this crap game, and he would wait till the pot of money got large. He would take the money then he would take the money from the game. They would run. And other people in the game would run and chase him, catch him, beat the shit out of him, and then allow him to continue. And despite this, allow him to continuously get back into the game. This went on, of course, Friday night after Friday night until this time. Of course, someone ended up killing him. Now, a lot of layers to this scene. Number one, the game within the game. Number one, first of all, it connected every aspect of the three things that this series would follow: the street, the cops, and the cops, and the drug trade. So even though there were no drugs involved in this particular scene, the game in terms of the game was the street, and all those things connected with this one scene. Now, you had the game of craps, one part of the game. The second part, you have the game within the game, in where, okay, we're gonna allow this. We know this dude's probably gonna take the pot. He's gonna take the money, but we're gonna chase him down, beat him up, and then allow him to get back into the game the next week, the next time we play. So that's the game that was the game within the game, and then the third part is of course, once you go past that, and it turns into a murder. Now you have to involve the police, and now you have a situation where you're playing, a game of to snitch or not to snitch. Now, originally, the guy who was talking to McNulty did not, refuse to go into the courtroom, but McNulty, to his credit, of course, played by Dominic West, who, by the way, at the time, 2002, Dominic West was in a movie with Sandra Bullock called what was that movie where she was an alcoholic? It's not 21 Days. I think it might have been 21 Days. I forgot the name of the movie that he was in with Sandra Bullock, but it's about when Sandra Bullock was an alcoholic. They both were alcoholics. She ended up going to rehab. They had a romance and what have you. Prior to that, no one had never seen Dominique. I hadn't seen Dominique West in anything, and that was basically that basically made up for the majority of the Wire cast. you would see faces and be like, "Hey, I know that face," but if you looked at the names, you did not know these for the most part. You did not know these names in terms of this cast of characters. It was a lot of characters, a lot of cast, a lot of of course, a predominantly African American cast, which contribute to why you know why some of why the ratings wasn't quite the way it was. Nobody had seen this many African Americans on television in one show. I think for in a long time. But getting back to the opening scene, McNulty, this would make McNulty a great cop. He allows, he was endearing. He allowed the guy to tell his story. Didn't push in terms of trying to find out answers. Wasn't playing bad cop. Really allowed the guy to tell his story and to get what he wanted to get off his chest, and end up getting the guy to in one of the scenes that would come along, the scene where they were in the courtroom or head to the courtroom when he's walking with Bunk, said that the guy ended up confessing, telling who did it, and got for a pack of Newport. So he ended up getting the guy to flip on whoever shot Snot Boogie. So that was the brilliance of McNulty in the course of that scene. And again, this was McNulty. We would see, of course, other parts of McNulty over the course of this episode. This episode was 62 minutes long. It was one of the longer episodes in the first season. Most of these episodes ran about 55 to 60 minutes, but this episode went 62 minutes long. We're gonna go over some key scenes over the course of the episode. I'll give you my MVP of the episode. I will give you my MVP of the episode, and I will grade this episode during the course of this podcast. Of course, this is the Real Deal Podcast Special Edition, the Wire Remix, Episode 1, Season 1. Now, again, you had this cast, you had a number of actors who had bounced around, who had been on, been in a lot of these actors were New York actors. They were a mix of New York actors, a mix of some actors from London. You had Dominic West and Idris Elba, who were both from London. You had a mixture of some veteran actors that had been around, but none of them had really. There was no stars at all in this. There were no stars in this show up until this point, and this was a show where really Baltimore was the star. To be honest with you, Baltimore was the star, and this was really like one of the first shows that I saw. Now I know you had Life on the Street, Homicide, Life on the Street which was also part. David Simon was a part of that, but really there hadn't been no shows that I remember up to that point that had been that had been driven by Baltimore, and where Baltimore was a character. So you had that going on with this show. Now, some of the key scenes to take note of. Number one, you have D'Angelo. You have the courtroom scene where D'Angelo Barksdale, who of course was the nephew of the kingpin Avon Barksdale, had been charged with a murder. Now in the courtroom, you have Stringer, Weebay, Stinkum, Sabino, some of the a lot of who were the top, either the top lieutenants or top muscle for the Barksdale gang. You had them in the courtroom intimidating a number of the witnesses who were testifying. You had a scene. That's a scene where you have a lawyer, Levy, who was, of course, the lawyer of the Barksdales, who just asked one question. D'Angelo gets off because the witness, Nakisha Lyles, basically recanted her statement and says that she initially said that she saw who shot the guy in the building. D'Angelo Barksdale, of course, was accused of shooting another guy, and he did it. He shooting another guy in the towers. She said that she thought that she saw D'Angelo, and then she went back and recanted her statement and said that it looked like somebody like D'Angelo Barksdale. So she was paid off by the Barksdales, and D'Angelo gets off. Now, again, this showed a level of organization by the Barksdales, paying off witnesses, and not just witness intimidation, but just but the idea that you can paying off a witness, having a lawyer as powerful as Levy, and really this was a theme throughout this first episode where the criminals, the Barksdale organization, was more structured and organized than the cops. I mean, the cops did, throughout the course of this episode, the cops didn't know. Even the Judge Phelan, who McNulty got in trouble with Rawls because he spoke to the judge, and nobody even knew who Avon Barksdale was. This was one of the biggest drug dealers, probably at the time, the biggest drug dealer in West Baltimore, and no one knew who he was. Not the cops, not the judge, no one. One hand, you have the Barksdale organization, who has rules in terms of how they wanted their organization ran. Weebay and D'Angelo are in the car. This is another key scene. Weebay and D'Angelo are in the car. D'Angelo's running his mouth, about the case and about the case and what have you. Weebay, who's the main muscle, basically tries to give him a hint to shut up by turning the music up. He's playing some Jay-Z in the car. D'Angelo keeps talking. Weebay pulls the car over, stops in front of a fast food place, New York Fried Chicken, and basically makes D'Angelo go over what the rules are. Rules being, we don't talk shop, we don't talk in the car, we don't talk around no one that said unless it's our people. We don't talk shop, D'Angelo basically says, "Hey, this is our car. This is your car. I'm talking to you." Weebay isn't trying to hear it, so D'Angelo says, "No talking in the car." Again, the structure and organization of a criminal, of criminals and drug dealers, which I don't think had been seen before on television. I don't think that had been seen before on television. So that lets you know right there how serious this organization was as far as having their shit together with just following rules, having a culture. There was a culture. We talk about do a sports program talking about cultures all the time. The culture in the Barksdale organization was already set in terms of the rules that they had. It was a culture that came from the top, from Avon, from Stringer. Now, you had a courtroom scene. You had the scene between McNulty and the judge. McNulty, the judge basically asked McNulty what happened in the courtroom. McNulty says, "Hey, you had people in the courtroom who are intimidating the witnesses." He tells McNulty tells the judge about the Barksdales, about how many bodies they're dropping, about how he controls the towers, running coke and dope 24/7, and like most people, like most authority figures over the course of this episode, especially the cops, no one knew who Avon Barksdale or this whole crew was. No one. And McNulty's basically saying, "Hey, everybody knows," but no one knew. So this gets McNulty in trouble, of course, with the powers that be, because the judge makes some noise, and the next thing you know, this leads to them basically having a detail have set up, led by, of course, Cedric Daniels, who was at that time the shift lieutenant, to get an investigation into what is going on. Now, again, you will see that will go on in our next episode, the detail, episode 2. But McNulty set all of this off through his actions and through him talking to the judge about Avon Barksdale and what had went on. So you had that scene, which got McNulty, of course, in hot water with Deputy Rawls, who was his supervisor, well, not his supervisor, but his boss in the who was his boss, and this gets McNulty in hot water. Now, listen, McNulty, as we all knew, McNulty, even if you hadn't watched the series, this entire series, at this point, 20, 15 to 25 minutes into this episode, that McNulty is going to be that dude. McNulty is going to be the guy who is going to challenge authority. He's going to be the guy who just doesn't know when to keep his mouth shut. Doesn't know to keep his mouth shut at all in terms of certain things. He is the guy. He's that, he's going to be that kind of like that rogue, that challenging authority, that rogue cop in terms of challenging authority. He has an argument later in the episode with Cedric Daniels about how to do the case and how to go about the case. Cedric Daniels, of course, was the shift lieutenant. He wants a clean buy bus. He wants to keep things nice and neat. Does not feel like this is going to be a serious investigation. Didn't feel like this is going to be a serious investigation over the course of this episode. Now, over the course of this episode, a lot of characters. This was one of the problems that people had with this show. There were a number of characters introduced even in this first episode. Even in this first episode, there were a lot of characters. Another key scene: D'Angelo and Avon in the club. So Avon comes out. D'Angelo is out of jail. He's driven to a strip club, which is played as one of the locations, as one of the headquarters of the Barksdales and their organization. One of many, which of course we'll find out later on over the course of over this season. But the main, you can kind of say they ripped this off in terms of The Sopranos. That is a fair comparison with the bada bing. So you have no problem with that, saying that they could have copied off The Sopranos from that standpoint. I don't think they did, but that argument can be made. So you have Avon upstairs, sweatsuit, low profile, gives D'Angelo a lecture on White, on him shooting the dude in the towers. D'Angelo, of course, panicked, said the dude came at him, immediately pulled the gun out. And Avon, of course, Avon is the uncle of D'Angelo, and Avon gives him an earful. He gives him an earful about shooting the guy, basically saying, "Listen, we have people all throughout the building. You couldn't take a beating. You couldn't take a beating. Just take a beating and keep it moving. You had to shoot him, and now we had to pay some witnesses off. Had to go through all this trouble, spending time and money to get you out, of your situation. Now, it's hard. It was tough love, but it was endearing and brilliant. And Wood Harris was brilliant in this scene. Wood Harris, who played Avon Barksdale, was tremendous in this scene. Now, before this, I hadn't seen Wood Harris, and I remembered Wood Harris from Above the Rim. So that's where I knew his face from Above the Rim. But of course, you saw him in Paid in Full that year in 2002. He did the Jimi Hendrix biography in 2000. So he had been around for 4 or 5 years prior to back here. The important part of this scene, to me, this scene told a lot. Number one, how much he loved how much he loved D'Angelo, and the whole idea of family. Yes, Avon was pissed off at D'Angelo for the mistake, but at the end of that scene, he says, "Hey, don't walk away like that. You still family. I love you." And he not only is endearing, but he's also tough in terms of the discipline. And this, again, D'Angelo finds out. D'Angelo asks him, basically says, "Look, when I get back to the tower, I'm going to be, on my game and what have you." Very subtle move by Avon in that scene. Avon just puts his head down, drops his head. That was to basically say, "No, you're not going to be back in the towers. You're demoted." And we would go, and of course, that D'Angelo gets demoted to the pit. He gets demoted to the pit he had a tower. He gets demoted to the pit. Just because he was his nephew didn't mean anything. Avon was about business from that standpoint of how he ran his organization. The structure, the discipline, the organization of the criminals versus the cops was something that just persisted throughout the course of this episode. Now, getting to the cops, you have introduced. You, of course, you knew about McNulty, but you also learned about Carver, Carver, and Herc. You saw Kima, Carver, and Herc in one of the early scenes where Kima's as a snitch, as a CI in the car, letting her know what's going on, in another car where there's some guns, illegal activity going on, and Kima. They search the car, they stop the car gets stopped, they pull over the car, it has one gun, they pull out one gun, Kima finds two guns, and she lets them know, two guns. So automatically you know Kima is thorough in terms of being, she's doing all the typing, she's thorough about police work, as in comparisons to Carver and Herc, who all they want to do, all the two have an interest in doing, is basically busting up head, as they say, kicking ass and taking names, busting heads up, and they had, again, no snitches. They didn't have no any connections on the street from that standpoint. It was Kima CI it was Kima CI Kima who had the CIs. Not only the girl who showed her where the guns were at, but also later on in the episode we will find out her relationship with Bubbles, who, by the way, was based on a real life character. So you got a little insight into cops, um, into some of the cops. With Cedric Daniels, he was called by Bunk a company man, again, who may be on the who will be up for a possible major spot if he can keep his nose clean. You got to know Jay Landsman, who made a bet with McNulty that if you keep this up, you're gonna be riding the boat. They make that $10 bet, and a bit of foreshadowing from that standpoint. Another key scene involving D'Angelo Barksdale. It was a very short, quick scene. It followed now. When D'Angelo's first day in the pit, or one of his first days in the pit, you had Johnny Weeks, who was Bubbles' assistant, the young man that Bubbles was schooling, taking under his wing, basically beating the drug dealers with fake money. So he gets caught using a fake $10 bill. Bodie and a couple other Barksdale little small soldiers beat him up, beat the living daylights out of him. He ends up in the hospital. And Stringer and D'Angelo meet in the club, and D'Angelo basically was complaining about how vicious the beating was and saying that they didn't have to take it that far. Stringer checks D'Angelo immediately, saying, look, this is a part of the game. We have to send a message. We can't show no weakness. I think at this point, I think it was some foreshadowing in this scene. I think at this point, Stringer gets a sense of D'Angelo being weak. Now, we know, if you watch the entire series, what would later happen between those two. We'll have plenty of time to get into that. But that right there, to me, I'm looking from Stringer's perspective. That would tell me that, this guy, we know he's Avon's nephew, but this guy's not a real soldier. This guy's really not cut out for this part, of the drug game. And then, D'Angelo, this episode showed D'Angelo's. I'm not saying D'Angelo was all the way incompetent, 100% incompetent, but you can tell from this episode, from this first episode, that he was not built for the drug game. But at the same time, and I think the thing that I think people liked about the D'Angelo character, despite the fact that he was involved in the drug trade, it was somebody that you could easily root for, because you watched this episode, you just wanted him to get out. You wanted him to get out if you watch this episode, and that will go. Uh, we'll talk more. We'll talk about that more over the course of the series. So you had that scene. You had that scene as well. There was a couple of things of note. A young Michael B. Jordan as Wallace. A young Michael B. Jordan as Wallace. He couldn't have been older than 14, been 15, 16 years old. If that, I think he was like 16. So you had a young Michael B. Jordan playing Wallace. He was the one that got burnt for the money that Bubbles' mentee. Uh, he's the one that came and tried to do with the fake money. Got tricked for the money, and you had him. You had Bodie calling D'Angelo out for not being tougher on Wallace, and you already saw again that gave you some hints of things to come in terms of the Wallace D'Angelo relationship. But it didn't take long for us to find out, to us to know that Bodie was all in terms of the drug game. He was all in. He was 100% soldier. Um, probably Bodie probably should have had D'Angelo's job. To be honest with you, in terms of running the pit, I think that this might have been a weakness of Avon in terms of him not recognizing that D'Angelo was not cut out for the drug game and having put D'Angelo in such a powerful position of having a tower. So that probably was a weakness that that leadership went both ways as far as him demoting D'Angelo, but probably D'Angelo probably shouldn't have been in that position to begin with. But again, you got a sense with Avon D'Angelo similar to the Godfather. I feel with Michael and Fredo, like he's my family. I have to look out for him. I have to look out for him because if I don't look out for him, then he's gonna be lost. He's gonna be lost if I don't look out for him. As far as MVP of the episode, I thought the MVP of the episode has to be Jimmy McNulty. McNulty was in a majority of the scenes. He kind of got the whole thing jumping as far as looking into Avon Barksdale. He was brilliant in that first scene with Snot Boogie and the other young actor that was telling the story of how Snot Boogie got killed. I thought that McNulty, he was funny. His scenes with Bunk were funny at the bar. They're telling and on the train tracks with Bunk's telling the story about shooting a mouse with a service weapon, which by the way is a true story. If you read some stuff that was written about The Wire, that's based on a true story. The Bunk character is based on a real live cop as well. So I think McNulty was the MVP of this episode, with D'Angelo coming in a close second. Because I thought Larry Gilliard Jr., who played D'Angelo Barksdale, was very good in this episode. Again, making it easy. If it's possible to root for a criminal, you had to root for D'Angelo to get out of this, or root for D'Angelo to somehow get out of this life. Um, as far as the best scene, I think the best scene I would have you have to say now. Barksdale D'Angelo was close as far as their conversation, but I thought the best scene had to be the opening scene with Snot Boogie, McNulty, Snot Boogie, the McNulty Snot Boogie scene, because it set the entire tone for the entire series with how much was going on over the course. If you really look at that scene, it is a remarkable in terms of how well written it was, and just like I said, the games within the game, the whole connecting of the street, the police, and the drug trade. Even though that particular scene had nothing to do with drugs, but that scene set the entire tone for the entire series, not just for the season, but for the entire series. So that to me is the best. Was the best scene. A lot of critics had a problem. Now, when I look back at some of what critics were saying about this, the majority of the majority of of the reviews were good. The majority of the reviews were good. The problem people had with this, the problem people had with this, and I can look at out. We can look at. I can look at some of what the critics said in regards to this episode, or this in terms of this episode. I from Here's what Pittsburgh Post Gazette said. This, Here's what the Pittsburgh Post Gazette said. They stated that the producers' expectations that the audience would have the patience for a complex, moral, ambiguous, and slow unfolding story might prove unfounded. The cast members from Homicide and Oz are described as less accessible than the characters from The Wire. Here's what New York Times praised the performances of some of the cast and said that the show had moments that drew the viewer in, but ultimately required too much of its audience. And that basically was a lot. That basically was one of the main complaints about the show in terms of, living in a world where everything is wanted. We have a microwave audience, and even in 2002, there was a sense that the shows that got the highest ratings were the shows that had, action at every turn. People even back then, you did not the highest rated shows did not invest in making the audience think. That was not what was it about, what television was about. And The Wire, again, this episode was relatively slow, and I would give this overall episode a B plus because it certainly has aged well. But I could see someone just being out on this first episode if they're looking for immediate payoff, and that's what the Wire was not built for, immediate payoff. It was not built that way. But the you know but the level, again, the characters. And also, one of the criticisms were how many characters that this show had. Now, to a point, and this was said by David Simon. The last scene, of course, William Gant, who was the witness that fingered D'Angelo as the murderer, in the towers. He was shot in the head, and if you remember, D'Angelo walks up in the crowd, sees that it was Gant, and they do a flashback of William Gant pointing out D'Angelo in that opening courtroom scene. Now, that was the first and only time I ever remember The Wire doing a flashback. And Simon mentioned that HBO basically urged him to do that so that the audience wouldn't forget who the Gant character was. And the Gant character would end up being an important character in this series at the beginning of this series, to be honest with you. Let alone, throughout, especially through the course of season one. Simon didn't agree with HBO with this, but he ended up doing it anyway. But that would be the last time. That would be the last time that you saw a flashback in The Wire throughout the course of the 60 episodes, 5 seasons. That'll be the last time you saw that you saw a flashback. So overall, I gave this episode a B plus. The Snot Boogie scene was brilliant. The parallels between McNulty and D'Angelo Barksdale were well done. The lack of organization with the cops and resources they and resources towards, and even the fact that they even recognized who D'Angelo, who Avon Barksdale was, and even caring about the drug wars versus the organization from top to bottom of the criminals. Those comparisons, I thought they was brilliantly depicted in this episode. So based on that, I gave it a B plus. You can give it a B or B plus. It was not an A episode. Again, because it moved too slow, so it was not an A episode. So I say the episode was a B plus. That's gonna wrap it up for this edition of the Wire Remix Season 1, Episode 1. The Target will be back next week with Season 1, Episode 2, The Detail. Okay, of course, this is the Real Deal podcast. You will see me over the course, hear from me over the course of the week with some other podcasts. But in terms of The Wire, we'll be back next Sunday with another edition of The Wire Remixed Season 1, Episode 2. I'm out.